Cool. My name is Seven Jacobs. I'm a social entrepreneur and advocate for mental health. And catch me this week on The Jesse T Show.
Seven Jacobs, my brother. What's going on, man?
I'm good, man. A little bit tired, but really, really excited for this conversation. Let's get into it.
What's got you tired today?
Well, you know what? The last 2021, essentially, we'll say the last year, but 2021, this whole
18 months.
the whole of COVID is just been it's been a time to really put my head down and get lots of work done.
Yep.
Obviously, it comes to a time when you need to take a break, and because of the way that I'm really awful at that. So I'm coming to a time when I'm feeling a little bit kind of burned out and want to instead focus. Well, I'm taking some time away, but I'm also focusing on why I do what I do. Right. And I think today's conversation is actually going to be really invigorating for me because we're going to get a chance to talk about some of the stuff that I love the most and why I do all the put in all the effort that I put in, etc. So yeah, man, it's just one of those times, and I feel like a lot of people are probably feeling that right now.
Yeah,
But let's see if we can talk a bit about how to make it purposeful and focus on that and
I
let that
love
be
that.
energizing.
Yeah, that'd be a great conversation to have. Yeah, for me, I've been through similar periods over the last 18 months specifically, and really more so this year. So like from January 2021 to right now, we're shooting this August 30th. Um, I've had multiple periods, days, week, where it's just been an energetic low. It's been something, and I'm very attuned to my own energy and to what's kind of going on in different parts of the world and even beyond. And so I feel like there's a lot of people, like you mentioned, that have had these feelings and have had these spells, downturns. They feel like maybe not a lot of energy, maybe not a lot of drive, maybe not really, maybe just kind of absorbing all that is that's going on. And so I'd like to hear about kind of some of what you're doing. And I'll just say for me,
Sure.
I, I've I've uh, I've learned to really kind of just listen to those moments and really just pay attention to self-care in those moments. And so like there's been a lot more rest in the last 9 months. There's been a lot more plugging into people that kind of fill my soul and fill my bucket, so to speak. There's been a lot more self-care with like massages and like physical body work to kind of move some energy through, and even some different types of therapies. Do you know what
Yeah.
EFT tapping is? You know what?
No, I feel like it sounds very familiar, but
Yeah.
I
So
can't
there's
remember now.
something I learned with the help of a wonderful mentor named Nicole Lano, where you can move energy through the body almost like where you have meridian points and energy points, like if you were to do acupuncture. You can do
Right.
tapping. So you start at your temple, you go your eye, your nose,
Yeah, I think you described this to me on our
chest,
last recording,
here,
actually.
and it helps you
Yeah.
move energy through. But then what you can do, and like we've actually done some inner child work while doing this tapping, and it's been a beautiful release. So I've just had to really get focused this last 9 months specifically on how to kind of like get myself to a place of wholeness, because there have been times where I
Mm.
felt out of alignment with myself. So tell me about your journey.
Sure, sure. And that alignment is something I didn't understand for a long time. And now that there's always more to learn. There's always further to go. But I think now I'm so much closer than before. And you describing that to me is like, wow, this sounds so familiar, right? I get what you mean. And I think if it's gonna happen at any point, it's gonna happen now or the last 9 to 18 months, right? Is when it's gonna come out. So um I guess, yeah, for myself, we talked a lot in our last time we spoke together. We talked a lot about my journey in growing up and with mental health. And as a result, I was very angry, a very cynical, and very frustrated teenager, right? As you'd probably expect. And to be honest, that in itself is not uncommon, but it was the cynicism for me that kept me from thinking or from how should I say, of having any vision beyond what was right in that moment. So you get to that crossroads naturally when you're kind of becoming an adult and you're like, what the fuck do I want to do? And so I got to that crossroad as a very cynical person with a very, very limited kind of mindset, really not very expansive, lots of self-limiting beliefs, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, period. Um, I had a strong desire to try to make the world a better place, but I was very cynical about business and money and corporate jobs and any of that kind of stuff because of that life that I'd had growing up. Um, and so I kind of thought, well, my only real options are to either become a politician or to work for a charity in some regard. But I had a really strong desire to change my life. And at the time, what that really meant was be more financially secure. But actually, I think bigger than that was how do I be the person I want to be, right? So like, when you're like watching, it could be movies and TV shows, it could even be friends of other people in your real life, and you're like, I wish I had that quality, right? Or I wish I was more like that. I was like that with so many ways, with so many people, because I felt so restricted and closed down. Um, I felt so walled off from the rest of the world and from who I wanted to be. So I think more than that, I wanted to really explore myself. So it got to the point where I took a year off before I went to university or college, um, and kind of was like, what do I want to do? Throughout this year. One of the things I did um, during that year away is I went and lived in Nepal for 3 months.
Wow.
I lived in a really small, a really tiny, I mean, tiny, tiny mountaintop village called Barte, which overlooked. When I say overlooked, it was on the horizon, but very clear. A couple of the Annapurna Mountains, a couple of the biggest mountains in the world. I think within the top 10
Wow.
are there, because most of the bit tallest mountains in the world are in Nepal anyway, so that's actually not that big a deal, but the pictures were beautiful, and if I can find any, I'll send them to you if you want to put
Please
them
do.
anywhere or
I'd love to
whatever.
see it.
um it was really beautiful, really removed from everything else, and I was living there with the host family to volunteer. It was part of a program to volunteer in their village. Um and it was strange because I was so far out of my comfort zone that whatever was going to happen to me, and I didn't know this at the time, whatever was going to happen to me, I was going to absorb like the most absorbent sponge you've ever seen in your life. Do you know what I mean? I didn't
Right.
know this at the time. Looking back on it, I was like, okay, this is the perfect setting. I have space. I'm living so differently, and it's so uncomfortable that I'm almost being broken down. I love one thing I like to say is to build something up, you have to break it down first. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
very true with people, right? Sometimes we need to be broken down to be built back up. So I was very much broken down. And one of the books I brought with me, because I've brought a few books with me for that trip, and one of them was a book that was gifted to me through some volunteer work that I did. This book is called We Economy. Essentially, what it does is it walks through an economic concept uh, called Weconomics. Something really, it just sounds like strange, funny words, but essentially, the idea that business and the economy can work in a more social, supportive kind of way, can be more collaborative as opposed to competitive, which is very relevant for small businesses, for example, and for entrepreneurs. And so, what I didn't realize at the time was that I was about to be introduced to the concept of social entrepreneurship. So, I brought this book with me thinking, all right, well, I don't have that many books I want to bring with me. This was gifted to me. Fuck it. I may as well bring it. And I ended up rereading it like 2 or 3 times, making loads of notes, earmarking pages, because for some reason this content was just really gripping me. And it wasn't an especially, it wasn't like a crazy well written book or anything super special. It was very good quality, but it's like it wasn't, the most inspirational book ever, for example, but it would just introduce something so new to me that spoke to me so much that it changed my life. A book literally changed my life, and because of the place I was in, you can imagine. coming out of essentially a little hut to overlook these mountains, because our house was on this sheer cliff basically. So coming out of the front door of the hut to overlook these incredible mountains, reading this book that was changing my life,
Wow.
all the while feeling really frustrated, cynical, scared, and totally out of my comfort zone. So it was this really crazy mix of, okay, you're going to be changed. It's like the world was saying, okay, I'm going to change you now. And I was like, okay, but I didn't realize what was going on at the time. So it's introduced me to the concept of social entrepreneurship. And essentially what social entrepreneurship is the idea that with everything you do within entrepreneurship, you can do it for a greater good. And that doesn't just mean the result helps people, or you use the profits to donate to charity or something like that. Those things can be a part of it. But essentially, what it means, because our job as entrepreneurs is to create new systems, is to innovate, is to change. Essentially, what it means is with every single step of the way, find a way to do some social good. So some of my favorite examples, um, there's a shoe brand, a footwear brand called Tom's,
Oh
which I
yeah.
think is very popular in the States, right?
Yep.
They, I think, are there's a lot of little examples, but I think they're a fantastic big example. Everything from the production to what they do with their products to what they do with the profits, everything, every single step of the way, they found a way to do something good with it, to do some kind of social good or make some kind of social change somewhere for someone with something.
For those that don't know
Um,
about Tom's, give them a little detail on what they actually do
mm,
when people buy the shoes.
Yeah. So the reason Tom's is such a great example is because, as well as making great products that are kind of ethical and things like that, when someone buys the shoe, they have a scheme called the 1-for-1, which means that for everyone who buys a pair of their shoes, they give away a pair of shoes to someone who needs it. And they
Beautiful.
don't just do that. They do that a lot in developing countries where people might not have the money, but they also do it at home countries,
Mhm.
right? Like the UK and the US. So I'm based in the UK. I didn't say that in the beginning, if anyone missed our last episode, but yeah, they'll do it in the countries that they actually sell the products as well. So, and then on top of that, with a profit, with some of the profit, I want to say like a third of their profit
Wow.
goes to non-for-profit or charity initiatives, setting up sources of water in developing nations and all kinds of things. Every single step of the way, they found a way to do some good, whether it's paying someone a fair wage or whatever, you know what I mean? Which unfortunately isn't that common in the footwear industry. So
Sure.
do you know what I mean? They've gone, okay, let's be a social enterprise, a social business. Um, and this has empowered them to make the world a better place, because what they have is a sustainable business model. They have the freedom to innovate, to change lives, to use the money that they have to change lives, to use the systems that they have to make lives better. And that's something you can't get in a charity or if you go into politics, right?
Yep.
And so I went, huh. So this is a chance to do the thing that I thought was never possible. This is a chance to make the world a better place and fulfill the needs of my heart and my soul, which is what I was feeling at the time, that I really needed to make the world a better place, while also changing my life, which I was really, really keen and desperate, almost desperate to do. Because I was like, okay, I need to be a different person. I want to be more financially stable, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the perfect balance. And it just blew my mind. This was possible. Where at the time I was like, there's no way this is real. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas now to me, it's so obvious and simple, because as soon as I got back home from my trip away, I threw myself into it. One of the other stories I want to share, to kind of help illustrate this, is of one of the um, people who kind of, how do I say this? He kind of pioneers this idea, um, or it's essentially the concept of social business. So a guy named Professor Muhammad Yunus, and he's like in his 70s now, I think, but he basically travels the world speaking at events and things like that to convince people about the power of social business. And one of the things that he said, which I love, is it sounds very like blue sky thinking and kind of like a utopia. Actually, I don't think it's that unrealistic. It's this idea that we one day might have poverty museums the same way that right now we have Holocaust museums.
Wow. Can you imagine?
So, well, that's the thing. I don't think we can imagine it. And I think it's hard enough in a lot of the world. I think in America it'd be very, very difficult as well. There are some places where it might be a little bit easier, like Switzerland or something. They probably like, yeah, okay, we don't have much poverty, but vast majority of the world, that's impossible to understand, right? But if like, it's essentially the idea that we live in a world total of complete plenty. We live in the world that gives us way more than we need.
So
And,
real quick, you're
you
making me
know,
think of something about how
mm,
and plus, grab your water, right? So there's this idea that world hunger and clean water would only cost not only but $400 million to end world hunger and clean water. Can you imagine? Like, I mean, there's singular human beings that are billionaires dozens of times over.
yeah.
That $400 million is a chunk of change, but to one billionaire, they could afford it, right? To
Mm,
one human being out of the 23 or 2,400 billionaires that are in the world, only one of them would have to just chip in a percentage less than, I don't know, 10%, 5%
yeah.
of their fortune, and they can not cure, but basically end world hunger and clean water.
You know
So
what? One
so
of
if
the
one
funny
person
things
can do
is,
that,
yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. So what can we, well, so there's two things. There's like, what can we all do together? But then for me, one of the funny facts about water actually is, for every $1 we invest into giving people who need it clean access to clean water, we get between $3 and $30 back,
it's incredible. Just doing the
which is
right thing. And
insane. And it pays back. And so that's the really interesting thing about social business is, yeah, you're making the world a better place, but because it's done through a business model, it comes back to you too.
yeah,
um a lot of, so Tom's as an example, there's such strong brand loyalty there, they're going to keep getting that business. Do you know what I mean? um their overall profit margins are going to be lower, and they're okay with that. It doesn't mean that they're not a profitable, wildly successful business. So
right.
I think it's like, I think there's a couple things there. There's the mental attitude of, we're not trying to make as much money as humanly possible. We're trying to make enough money to be successful at what we do,
Yes.
to allow us to achieve our mission. Um, and you know what I mean? And then there's the knowledge that actually, because it makes the world a better place, people like you, and it makes for good business. It's harder to set up. It's harder to do. It's harder to create, and it's a longer term work.
Yep.
But once you've got it, but you know what I mean? It's almost like it's coming back to that idea of like, is it worth it? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? What do you want? And so, to me, it's not surprising that a lot of people who work super corporate jobs and things like that get really burned out, or just get really disillusioned with their work, or they stop caring about it, because what mission are you attached to,
Yep.
right?
You're just a
Why
cog
do
in a
you do
wheel.
what you do?
Yeah, and you're not
Exactly.
really supporting anything other than just the revenue generation of a company. And
Mm,
there's another story that came up while you were telling me kind of the
mm,
illustration of Tom's, and I wish I could remember the company's name. But basically, the founder of this company for a long time was either a limited or no revenue that he took for himself, but he wanted to make sure that every one of his employees was getting paid $70,000 or more, each one of them. And the idea behind it is they've done a happiness scale that if you make
mm.
$70,000, it's most people at $70,000 annual salary are going to be as happy as if they were making $100,000. It's like this test that they did, and so like $70,000 for some reason seems to be the
Mm,
number where people can live, a pretty quality life, and anything after that's just kind of extra. And so he knew this, and so he made sure every single one of his employees got paid $70,000 annually, and he took a limited to no income. And then what they did is that because they were so bought in and invested in him for, basically giving the shirt off of his back and believing in his team, then within a few years they bought him like a brand new Tesla or something like that. Like
wow.
they all chipped in. They all were like so thankful that he created this abundance for them because he took less than he could have. and
Yeah.
they're all like, they've all been there for years. They all like, they bought him a new Tesla. He was able to raise his salary up to like a CEO salary and all this different things. And so it's just people, they if they look at it from a human heart centric place first, you
Yeah.
really can run a very beautiful business that serves people, that helps the employees, that is a great in the community, that is a profitable company. But people just, this is something that I feel like is just, it needs to be more pronounced, and it needs to be talked about by the masses so that more people can hear about it.
And that's why I love hearing stories about people like Professor Eunice, because they kind of almost dedicate themselves to this mission. And I wish I was a bit better at articulating it, or I suppose I'm trying to be, and I'm learning to be better at articulating it, because I think it's so powerful. Everything you've just described also makes for a very profitable business. It might just take a bit longer to get
Yep.
there. And I think that is beautiful. I think it's the key to solving so many of the world's problems. Um, there are a couple of things within there to unpick that I'm sure we can discuss. Um, for example, having a really clearly defined purpose. So, why are you getting into something? I mean, I could ask you, for example, um, why did you start this podcast? What's your purpose with this podcast?
Yeah, to shine a light on people that are what I call vortexes of light, people that change people's lives just by what they're doing in the world. So giving
Mhm.
people a microphone and a voice to be able to amplify the work they're already doing.
Nice. And I love that. And see, and it's so with that, it was clearly defined. You straight away knew the answer. But it's also really well thought out, and it's attached to a personal reason,
Yep.
right? We can tell that there's a good reason that you set that out. There's also a reason that resonates with others, and it resonates within the heart, not just within the mind.
And the greedy part of it for me is I get to meet amazing human beings I get to do life with,
Mm,
and I get to learn. It's been a master class for me. So there's been a byproduct of wanting to highlight other people. It's been a beautiful like masterclass on everything: business, relationships, health and wellness, spirituality. And it's brought so many beautiful people into my life. So there's been this other side to it. But initially it was just, hey, Seven Jacobs is doing great in the world. Want to be able to have a conversation, learn more about him, and shine a little bit more light on what he's doing, kind of thing.
yeah, and that's beautiful. And the thing is, um, that reaps all those other benefits,
For
right?
sure.
So to ask you what that purpose is, well, over time you've got all the other benefits that come along with it. So for let's take a standard podcast as an example. Over time, you found a way to touch other people's lives, to highlight people's lives, that gives them a stage, that helps them. You get to learn, which means you're really interested. A normal podcast, once it grows, you can get sponsorships or partnerships, and that can become a financially stable or and very successful business in and
For
of
sure.
itself, after you do it for long enough, or if you find the right kind of people to sponsor with and to partner with. So that has become a business. It started from in here, a personal project in here, but it became something that in every single way is successful, right?
Yep.
A lot of the times we attach success to money,
Yep.
and that's very common in our society. Um, if we expand our definition of success to touch all the areas of life in which we wish there, in which we wish to be successful, I wish to have successful relationships. I wish to be financially successful. I wish to um, feel successful, which means confidence and have high self esteem. Every single way, I wish to help people and have an impact. All these ways can be created, or we can create vehicles to achieving all success in all of those ways through social entrepreneurship.
Yep.
So that is pretty much what I do, man. And so, I mean, the way it looks for me is I've supported a number of startup businesses over the last 4 or so years that I've been into entrepreneurship. A lot of it has been throwing myself into what entrepreneurship is. So not just building a business and calling myself an entrepreneur, but actually throwing myself into the meaning of entrepreneurship and what makes a great entrepreneur, a great leader, helping other young leaders with their entrepreneurship, um, and just doing my best to build up those businesses. And I'm still in a stage, maybe because I do so many different things all at once, where they're all still building, but because they're all connected to something for me. We can talk about what that thing is for me. But because they're all connected to a deeper meaning for me, I can spend lots of time making them with them still not, you know, being worth hundreds of millions or whatever. And I'm super happy because it's a lot of work. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a little bit burned out, but coming back to this purpose actually makes it so easy to get back into, you know. um there are a lot of things where even if you take a huge long break, you're like, but do I want to go back to this job? You know what I mean? Whereas to me, it's like, I'm going back to actions that fulfill a purpose. I'm not going back to a job. I'm going back to actions that fulfill a purpose. I'm only tired because I'm human
Yeah,
and
yeah,
weak.
you're
You know
actually
what I
tired just
mean?
because the energy you're expending. I have a question really quick before we jump
Mm,
into that about Nepal. How did you
mm,
decide to choose? How did Nepal call to you? And then
interesting.
from a connection standpoint, how did you make it happen where you were like living in this place? Like did you, was there like
Sure,
a website that said come live here and you get like, you work here, you get here for free? Like
sure.
how did it happen?
Sure. Well, in the UK, these kinds of things tend to be a little bit more straightforward. Because the government will fund more of them.
Wow.
So, well, they used to. I think it's actually shut down now. But basically, um, it's this program that I was aware of because I knew the guy who helped set it up, because I had been through a different youth program when I was a bit younger than that, that he was the CEO of. So, was kind of introduced to this concept. And what they do is you go into this program, you sign up, you fundraise some of the money, and they place you in one of their placement countries. And there's a list of like 12, I think a dozen or so.
Yep.
And I didn't get a choice.
Wow.
But here's the really funny thing. I looked at the list and went, I want Nepal. And I didn't even know why. But I really wanted to go to Nepal. I wanted to immerse myself in that culture. Um, my as I uh If you listen to our last episode, you'd know this, but I didn't know my mother very well. But one of the things I knew about her is that she was, for some reason, very into um, Buddhism,
Yeah.
Buddhism and a little bit of Hinduism as
Yeah.
well. Place I went to in Nepal was the Hindu part of Nepal, and most of Nepal is very Hindu. Um, but it was just, for some reason, it just really spoke to me. It's like
Yeah.
from a few different angles, it was just really speaking to me. But I had no choice. And then I got the email saying I'd be going somewhere else, but the date was way too soon. I was like, yo, there's no way I can fundraise
Yeah.
this. So they
Yeah.
said, we'll push you back a couple of months to give you more time to finish fundraising. And they put me in Nepal.
Wow.
It's
How
just
about the serendipity?
exactly, the dates just lined up. So I was like, wow. Um, Now, what I didn't expect was that where I would be living would be so incredibly different. Um, I think the only way to describe it is with those pictures. So I will find them and send them
Please.
to you. But
Yeah.
it was just, how do I say this? Nepal, Nepal is a very, very interesting place in the sense that it is, in a lot of ways, it is just like a developing nation the way you would imagine it. Um, there's a lot of um, there's a lot of just things that we are not used to. I think that's the best way to describe it. People who have a big tank of water out in their front of their house, and they use that water for everything, including bathing, and that's where they bathe.
Oh yeah.
um, Herds of cows, because um, to them, cows were sacred. That's
Yeah.
their religion, as part of their religion. It's just huge herds of cows everywhere. um, and it's almost this weird. It was this weird hodgepodge of villages and towns outside of the capital city of Kathmandu. Um, where you'd be going along a road that looks super old, but if you look at the villages around, sorry, the houses around in that town or village, you're like, how did this road even get here to begin with? You know what I mean? Because it's just strange. It's like such a weird mix of the modern stuff that we're used to. Most people, a lot of, not most, depending on where you go, a lot of people actually do have a phone. A lot of them are on Facebook, for example.
Wow.
Even in my
Wow.
village, a lot of people were on Facebook. I can't speak to them because they couldn't speak English, but I've got a few of them on Facebook
Yeah.
now. It's real strange. They can only access it through data, which they have to purchase per
Wow.
use, the way we
Yeah.
did, the way I don't think I've done since I was a kid.
Sure.
Um, because they don't have Wi-Fi. And finding a house with Wi-Fi is very rare. But at the same time, but all that stuff is there. But at the same time, the physical living conditions, it's like the bed, the bugs, where you sit, how you eat, how they cook and make food, all of it is very basic. It's like, here's our little stove and here's how we cook, and we sit cross-legged we would sit cross-legged on our porch with a little plate on the floor, eating with our fingers. So that's what
Awesome.
they do. um and it was just, I don't know, looking back on it, it's really nostalgic and strange and, really beautiful. Almost strangely really beautiful. But at the time, I was so uncomfortable. I have a story that I love to tell, and it sounds real weird, but I'm talking about, when I was 18. So I'm not, probably not that weird. At the time, I was so uncomfortable with so many things, a lot of which was because of my anxiety, that there were things I was uncomfortable with that I didn't even know came from my anxiety, because I just thought this was just where it was. So, for example, and I barely remember this now because to me, this is so weird. When I was a teenager, I would hate um, leaving the house without shoes on.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds real weird, but you know what I mean? It's one of these little normal things you don't think about. Is like, it felt almost like unclean or whatever. So I had to put on fresh pair of socks and shoes to leave the house. In Nepal, our toilet was outside of the main of the house. You had to come out the door and go in, and there's a little shed in the side of
Yeah.
the house. And that's where the hole was. That was the toilet, the
Yeah.
squat toilet, where there's just a hole in the floor. And it was essentially a case of, at the first few days I got there, every single time I wanted to go to the bathroom, I was putting on socks and shoes to walk 5 steps. And eventually I was like, what the fuck am I doing? This is so stupid. And so I just started walking barefoot, or I bought slippers, which I used to hate sandals for some reason. I
Yeah.
think, because my feet were uncovered or whatever. I just got used to being forced to do these things
Yep.
because it was so incredibly impractical to not, right? To bathe, again, you have to stand outside in front of the house, in front of, with this big tank of water, because that's where the bathing water was. How am I going to do that with socks and shoes on? Do you know what I mean? None of it made sense. So I just had to suck it up and deal
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
And that came back to the whole idea of, you need to be broken down to be built back up again. It was such strange levels of anxiety and discomfort over things that just didn't matter. But I had to go through it to break down those really weird barriers that probably never should have been there,
Do you know what grounding is?
The idea that you kind of bring yourself back down to earth, right? Something along those lines.
Well, there's it's I'm thinking about it because you had to take your shoes off and walk barefoot, but basically,
Mm,
you have different ions and different things in your body that you can kind of reset by basically putting your bare feet on any kind of ground, whether it's grass, whether it's sand,
okay.
whether it's yeah, and it goes along in this term called biohacking, where if you want to live healthy, vibrantly for a long time, you can add this into your game. So like things like getting 15 to 30 minutes at least of direct sunlight every day. Vitamin D will boost your immune system naturally, and vitamin D
Okay.
is even more than just a vitamin. It mimics almost like different hormones, which is so powerful for you. And getting movement in your day, whether that's walking or training your body, and then grounding it. You could do all three of those at once. You can get outside with bare feet, stand on the grass, do some working out, and get some sun. And these are the types of things that not only make you feel better, make you happier, but they're proven to help you live longer, healthier. And so
Wow.
I personally got into grounding a couple of years ago, and I try to do a lot of things barefoot. So I went from always like wanting to have shoes on, always wanted to have socks on, wanted my feet to be clean, to now I'm
Yeah.
like, the dirtier the better. Like let's get them,
Yeah.
let's get them dirty. And even, they don't have to be like dirty, but just like getting out in the grass and like standing, and like I'm even at, like, let's say my son's soccer practice, I'll be the only parent there with their shoes off while I'm standing in the ground, because I'm grounding. I know it's having a
Okay.
physical healthy benefit for my body. So it's interesting how our perceptions change. Where like once as a kid, I never would even know about it. I would be like, oh no, my feet are
Yeah.
touching the ground. And now I'm like, I
Gross.
can't wait
Yeah.
till my feet touch the ground, you know?
That's, why I find that fascinating. Do you feel like we've got the term, grounding ourselves,
Yeah.
where we will, which is what I just said, which is what I thought you were talking about, coming back down to earth as opposed to, you know, thinking too much, actually
Yep.
just kind of
Yep.
coming back down. I wonder if that's where that comes from, or if at least they're meant to be
I
very
I
similar.
bet they have an interplay with each other, no question. And then also,
Mm,
they say that whenever you travel, as soon as you get off the plane or you've been traveling for a while, get on like that local ground that you're on and ground to that local surface. And like it just check it out, man. There's a lot
mm.
of scientific data that backs up a lot of different health benefits from it. But I just love it. It just feels good too. It just actually feels good to put your feet in the grass. Or for me, in my case, I love the beach and the ocean. So get my feet in the
Mm.
sand, you know?
You know what? That's the thing. I think I'm so used to living in cities, and I've only really ever lived in, aside from Nepal, I've only ever lived in Los Angeles and London in the UK. And it is very concrete. Even
Oh yeah.
finding parks that you think are clean enough or safe enough or whatever to want to take your shoes off. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Um, so I think I just grew up with that mentality of like, ew, you know what I mean? But that was one of the many things that removed me from how beautiful this world is, and also from almost mentally from my potential, which sounds like a total tangent or like a totally removed thing. But actually, when you're holding yourself back so much, you know what I mean? All these little things, they add up to your comfortableness with yourself and your ability to almost feel and accept what is around you. I mean, you talked about how things like getting sunlight and your feet feeling the ground
Yes.
can make you live longer. That
Yeah.
sounds strange, right? But like
Yeah.
there's a science behind that
No
because
question.
of the way the human body works.
Yes.
All these little things that we use to hold ourselves back, there's a science behind that as to how that is making the human body not work the way
Yep.
it's supposed to, removing us from the way it's supposed to, and then impacting us in various ways as a result. So yeah, man. I mean, that's what Nepal was for me. It was almost a scary experience at the time,
Yeah.
where I was like, I'm just so far out of my comfort zone. At the time, my whole thing was, I've been in my comfort zone too long. Let me put myself out of it. Right.
And you were
That was
18 at this point?
I was 18 at that point. I think from the age of about 16, 17, I was like, I established I want to be putting myself out of my comfort zone as much as possible, but I was still horrible at it. I was
That's not a
horrible at
normal
it.
thing for a 16. Like maybe nowadays, maybe because I'm 39, so 23-ish years ago, around that time, 22-ish years
Mm,
ago, that I didn't even have that vernacular. I didn't even have that mindset of make myself uncomfortable. That didn't, like, now I can look back in my life and see things I did that made me uncomfortable, that made sense, and I grew from them, but I didn't have that
mm,
terminology at 16, 17 years old. And I wonder if it's also just a sign of the times, because this is something
mm.
where over the last few years, this has been said a lot by a lot of different thought leaders, like make yourself uncomfortable. Growth is on the other side of like your comfort zone, like
Yeah.
all that type of stuff. I didn't know that stuff until like my early to mid 20s. And again, I think it could be kind of like social knowledge, but I think it's really special, not to take away from like who
Mm,
you are, because at a 16 or 17-year old, even if they did have that information, how many would actually act on it? How many would be pushed or
mm,
pulled on their soul's journey to be able to go do something like that? And it's very rare. And ever since we started talking, I was always impressed by, I even asked you, I was like, what kind of like spirituality practices are you into? Like, what do you kind of, and you're just telling me, it's like, I don't want to say it comes natural, because I know you do a lot of work around this stuff, but a lot of it, you seem like you've caught on at an early age.
You know what? I think it's a mix of both, because I think I from my experience, especially because a lot of my early career was working with young people, I think you'd be very right to say that it's kind of a generational thing. I think we've been forced to look at a lot of things. I think we've also been naturally exposed to a lot of things. One of the positives of things like social media and how big it is
Yeah.
means that if you find something that speaks to you, even if you don't know why it speaks to you, and I think this also helps answer what things are like for me personally. Even if you don't know why something speaks to you, it's like when the world is calling to you and you kind of
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
feel something.
Yep.
social media can be a conduit for that. It can be
No question.
weird and there can be a lot of noise, but if you happen to find a content creator, for example, who really speaks to you, and then as a result, you learn about your dream career, that's something you couldn't access 20 years ago because the social media wasn't there. The platform that you accidentally learned about this thing from wasn't there. The same kind of things would happen. I've always happened. So, oh, I accidentally met someone at a bar who told me about their job. And actually, now I think this is my dream job. But that can just happen more easily. It can happen on my phone. Right.
Sharing of
So,
information. Yep.
exactly. But about like the kind of idea of taking it on, I think the only thing with myself is that I've always been so self-critical, I think, and it was a very, very unhealthy thing for a very
Sure.
long time. I
Sure.
was so self-critical that I was aware when I was happy with myself or I wasn't. So if I was aware that needing to push myself out of my comfort zone was what I needed to do to grow, I would force myself to do it just because I was aware that not doing it would mean that I wasn't being the person I wanted to be,
Yep.
if that makes
No, it's
sense. And
good.
and that's
Yeah.
and that's all that it was. It wasn't a case of, you know, um, I'm aware about this thing or I'm smarter, in this way or whatever. No, I think I'm a total dumbass personally. I think it's just I'm very it's just awareness about what is and what isn't. And sometimes it's not even awareness about what is, at least in my past, a lot of it was awareness about what isn't, and then being hard on myself as a result, allowing me to kind of be like, okay, so now you need to go do this. And sometimes I don't think that was conscious either. Sometimes it was just I need to do this because it's gonna help me somehow. I don't know how and I don't like it, but I'm just gonna keep doing it and hope something works out. And then, 4 years later, I'm telling that story on a podcast. So
Beautiful,
there you
brother.
go.
I love it. No, there's a lot of power there, and there's so many things that I've heard, but one of the biggest things is your best life is on the other side of fear, and so this breaking of
Mm,
comfort zones, this putting yourself out there to fall on your face, to learn how to get back up, all these different things give you a beautiful life when you look back on it. Like, can you imagine knowing what you know now? And I think you're what, 23 ish, somewhere around there. Yeah.
22, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so even younger. So at 22 years old, you've seen a lot of life. Can you imagine if you get to 80 years old and you look back in your life and you didn't do some of those things, and like you were shown a version of like someone, I think David Goggins talks about this, who's a very powerful
Yeah.
yeah, very powerful human being in a lot of ways. He's like his version of hell, or what he heard hell is like when you get to the end of your life and you die, you're this person, and then his version of hell would be like the person he could have been, that he just gave up on, that he never was that person. Like, so like if he never did the things that he was meant to do, or did the things he was chasing after, like breaking comfort zones,
Mm,
like this unbelievable life that he could have lived would be like, that would be his version of hell, where like he could have done these things but he never did, and so like he like gave up on his life. Can you imagine not going to Nepal and not doing the things that you did right now? Like, it's changed your life.
yeah. That's the thing. I can't imagine it in the sense that this is what it is and I don't know anything else. At the same time, I can kind of force myself to imagine what I'd be like otherwise. And I can only assume I'd be like I was a few years ago, still even more full of anxiety and
Oh
other
yeah.
mental health problems, and therefore even further from living my best life.
I'm
And
just gonna
and
say,
and it scares me the
you
way,
wouldn't be you.
your description.
You wouldn't
Exactly,
be this
right?
version of who you are now. And
Mm,
this is a linchpin and a launch pad for you to be able to go and do so many
mm.
more amazing things. And again, even day-to-day things, like conversations that you have, and like the joy and the light that you can bring, and the interesting things that you can weave in and out of dialogue because you've had that
Sure.
experience. Like, if you didn't go to Nepal, like, this would be one huge part of your life, that changed so many things. But even just in conversation, it's a badass conversation to have. It's like, I went
That's
to
the
Nepal, I
thing.
lived there. That was good.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing, and for me, one of the things I want to share with your listeners today is the idea of purpose, and I feel like it weaves itself throughout your entire podcast, to be honest with you. So it's probably been done to death on here, but it's almost this for me, it's this idea that um that connection that you have, that you can, it's almost like if the world tries to tell you something, you have an ability to listen to it, right? I describe it as listening to the world, right? whether it's signs the world throws at you, or if people keep mentioning the same thing, maybe I should listen to this.
Yeah,
or or it could be something as simple as a gut or intuitive feeling, right? Sometimes what we call intuition, I personally feel that our intuition, at least sometimes, is just a way of tapping into um things that we are unconsciously noticing in ourselves or the world,
for sure.
or whatever it is we're being intuitive about. And so we can develop the ability to listen to that. And so for me, purpose is just what I've heard, what I've tried to listen to within a certain area. So it could be a life purpose, or it could be a purpose with a specific thing you try to create. It could be a business. This podcast is a great example. Um, Anything you try to create, whether it's a system or it's your whole life, can and should have a purpose attached to it, and it comes from that intuitive feeling. That for me, I think was, we've talked a lot about uh, uh, um, uh, almost seeing and choosing to take on perspectives and growth, etc. But actually, for me, I think that was the first conscious choice that I made, was to set a purpose. Um, so for me at the moment, it is to level the playing field. That's basically it. My what to the I have a conduit for all the businesses I've helped support, which is called the Discover Humanity Group. And that group, the purpose of that group is to um, level the playing field for all of the people that we support, whether that's clients, customers, or uh, the industry the business is in, whatever it is, to level the playing field, so that we can create the opportunities that, for example, I never had, right? And that for me was the most powerful thing. We've talked about the things that happen subconsciously or without knowing, but for me, there were a series of steps as a result of this journey that added to almost like a list or a melting pot, you could say, of learnings that led to the person that I am now, like you described. The first one was purpose. And it's at the heart of all social business. You can't have a social business. You can't be a social entrepreneur without having a purpose that speaks to what you do and why you do it.
Yeah.
So that for me, I think, was the most powerful thing, to be honest.
I love that. And you could tell that like what you do matters to you and how you show up in the world and how you leave an impact by being of service. And I want to touch on one more point was you were
Mm,
really starting to get lit up about the idea of entrepreneurship and lit up about how that
mm,
what that actually means to you. So what does entrepreneurship, the art of entrepreneurship mean? Instead of
yeah.
just making money by driving business, but like holistically to you, what does
Mm.
it mean to you and how do you deploy it when you're in business?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously, my perspective is going to is going to be limited in use in some ways, just from relative lack of experience. But at the same time, entrepreneurship is what I really throw myself into because I find it so fun and fascinating. To me, I describe social entrepreneurship like putting together a puzzle. You've got all these different pieces. How do you make them fit? Um, so, what really lights me up about entrepreneurship is that it's an opportunity for innovation, for something that is creative, that is more interesting. Our society really values uh, technology, being smart, as well as being talented, right? Whereas entrepreneurship is about hard work, skills, and creativity. When you're in school, we only really care about things like math, science, language like English. And if it's anything that isn't those things, it's something that you're only doing because you're naturally talented at it.
Yep.
Actually, entrepreneurship is none of those things. You can be someone who, like myself, describes myself as kind of a dumbass, but if you're willing to learn, if you work hard, if you're a reflective and introspective person, if you put creativity into things and are genuinely interested in creating innovation, and you can be a fantastic entrepreneur. And so, what does entrepreneurship mean to me and why does it light me up so much is because it's an opportunity to take what you love, right, what you're passionate about, align it with something like a purpose, and then through hard work, learning and reflection, teamwork, right, lots of amazing skills, turn it into something that is much bigger than just you. And that to me, it is a powerful vehicle for change, but it's also a very, very fascinating thing, period, right? It's fascinating and exhilarating that we can create something that is bigger than us through that combination of skills, the combination of innovation and self leadership, which is probably the two main things or they are the two main things I talk about. Through that combination, um, we have so much power within us that otherwise I personally think is a bit latent. There are ways that you can apply these concepts to a job. If you have a certain job that you love, you can apply these things to that job or that workplace and still have that impact. But to me, the most pure form of doing that is by creating a vehicle that can achieve lots of those different goals. Again, ways of making the world a better place, as well as ways of making your own life better. Um, Entrepreneurship without the social entrepreneurship, pretty much to me, just means being a great leader who innovates and puts in those skills, such as the work and the learning. Um, and I think the creativity is a big point. And I use the word innovation a lot, but creativity is a huge part of innovation. Um, Creativity is it's the fun part, basically. I think it's very natural for human beings to be creative, and I think we unfortunately silence it a lot,
Sure.
at least nowadays, which I think is a total crime.
Yeah.
I think it's horrible because we have so much opportunity to be beautiful and to create, to manifest not just the world we want to see, but the version of ourselves within that world. Um, you know what I mean? So harnessing these things in a way that will continue to work because it's a sustainable business vehicle. So when I use the word vehicle, really what I mean is a business that works and is sustainable, um, so that you have a platform off which to do all these really interesting, amazing things. That's why Tom's was such a great example because first and foremost, they're a profitable footwear brand, right? Um, so it's that combination, it's that entrepreneurial thinking, um, that to me is so interesting. And actually, you can put all those things into those thoughts. You can put all those things into entrepreneurial thinking. Um, the word I use, which is a super long word, entrepreneurialism. So almost being the entrepreneurial person and applying whatever mentally and physically that means to whatever you do. You can be entrepreneurial at solving a random problem around your house,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You can be entrepreneurial at work at a normal 9 to 5 job, and therefore make it more interesting. I've heard people who have um fantastic story that's actually in the book I described at the beginning called We Economy, where a staff member of theirs created of one of the co-authors noticed an inconsistency within the business she was working for. She then went, here's a business plan to change this, and started a whole new business in partnership with her with the company she was already working for to do that. She applied the entrepreneurialism to it. It changed her job. It created a new business. It created extra support stream for their customers that were already a part of what they were doing. Um, and it's just like, wow, you can apply those concepts to whatever you're doing. And it just makes, as well as having those impacts, I just personally think it makes life a lot more interesting. There's so much more opportunity there. You're creating and making opportunity for yourself and for others. All these things, they're just really, really exciting to me. So I'm like, I just keep talking and talking and talking on forever. But I just think there's so much uh, uh, room for expansion within entrepreneurship, and specifically social entrepreneurship, if you take on those right kind of skills and mindsets.
I couldn't agree more, brother. And I've been called entrepreneurship my whole life, from as a kid till now, and have
Mm,
different seasons and different iterations with it. But I'll tell you, from just knowing the economy and how business works, if it wasn't for small business, quote unquote small business,
mm.
the infrastructure of business wouldn't even be there. Most
Here's a
it's
fun fact for
go
you.
for it.
We one of the guests I spoke to on my podcast back at its beginning, he is like a therapist for entrepreneurs. So specifically, that's his
That's great.
niche. I
Yeah.
know, because we need it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it is a stressful thing. And one of the facts he shared with me, because a lot of what he shared with me was about how weird entrepreneurship is. It's not, putting yourself out there the way we need to is not considered normal. It's difficult. It's hard.
For sure.
And one of the facts he shared with me is that as difficult as it is, it's absolutely necessary. He's based in the States, so I think this fact is specific to America. But um, every, like, year on year, anywhere from 80 to 100% of new jobs are created by new small businesses.
Yep.
So as difficult as entrepreneurship is, and as much as people get into it um, because they have a new invention or whatever, or a new innovation, or they have a purpose they want to help solve, it's also incredibly important that we help make these succeed because they're vital for our economy.
No
You
question.
know what
It's
I
the
mean?
backbone.
So there you go. It's in every single way. Entrepreneurship, I think, is so vital and important. One of the really fun, but also, I just think it's kind of interesting, is the way different cultures and around the world respond to entrepreneurship. So over here in Europe, we acknowledge that America is a lot more entrepreneurial than we are. However, someone who did a bit of work with me at one point, he um he is now based in the US, I think somewhere up north in the US, one of the northern states. But he lived in Hong Kong for a lot of his life. And he was like, Hong Kong, he came back to America and he was like, America isn't that entrepreneurial. Hong Kong is crazy. It's like, what? Really? Because over here in Europe, we're
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
America is way more entrepreneurial. It's the mindset of how weird is it to be an entrepreneur. In the Europe, it's not very respected um, until you've made lots of money, and that's when it comes back to, well, too much of the success is tied to money. In America, it's a little bit more common. It isn't super common, but a lot of people understand it or feel that entrepreneurial spirit of, let me go do something, let me hustle, let me try to change something, let me try to change my life, etc. And there are some places in the world where it's actually just the norm. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a lot rarer. I think Hong Kong is probably a rarer example, but you know what I mean? It shows what it showed me. I think the reason I find it so interesting is what it showed me is um it isn't necessarily about, like, you don't have to be the right kind of person. Some people aren't really meant for entrepreneurship. However, a lot of it comes down to having the right mindset and being interested in building the right skills. You don't even need to have them yet. Do you know what I mean? One of the most kind of common pieces of advice that was given to me earlier on in my career was just get started,
Yep.
you
Just
know,
start.
because you can. And that's it. And if again, coming to getting out of your comfort zone, pushes out of your comfort zone, fantastic. If you fail as a result, as long as you've learned from it, you've got those entrepreneurial skills. I'm sure we've both failed at businesses in the past. I've failed at
No
things I can't
question.
even,
The
you know what I
difference
mean? I
between
can't even
failure
remember
and
anymore.
quitting, like for me, is
Mm,
there's so much. Like I've had multiple business ventures, two that have been successful, and the other couple were learning lessons for me. But because I didn't
mm.
quit, to me it wasn't a failure. It's like if and even quitting
Ah,
sometimes isn't failure. It depends on what you need to do it for. So, but the way I look
mm,
at it is everything's learning, and like you said, you can learn. That's the beauty of entrepreneurship and really life is you
mm.
learn as you go. mimics
Yeah.
life so beautifully, where there's ups and downs, there's unknowns, there's big wins, there's low lows, but over the course of time, you're just living and you're learning. And I think that the
Yeah.
two parallel, and if you can learn how to weave your life into your business where it's symbiotic, and it's like, for me, it's pretty much, it's just how I live my life. My quality of life isn't any different, because a lot of the people that I do life with are people that are like clients or podcast guests, and I've just woven them together. So I've kind of built this life of just enjoyment. Yeah, and there's a lot of work, and there's times where I'm stressed out, or there's times where like I'm energetically down. But at the end of the day, that's just part of the journey, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
100%. For me, I like, I really feel what you're saying, because there isn't there's no magic bullet solution. But I think if you're coming at it from outside of this, if you haven't immersed yourself in this, it sounds like we've both spent lots of time immersing ourselves in what this lifestyle is like and what these kinds of things mean. I think from outside, so for example, the perspectives of some of my friends who don't really understand what I do, um, it's almost this idea that what you're doing is weird or different or too difficult. And actually, what it is it's really just, in a way, almost, you could almost copy and paste it and put it into someone else if you wanted to, a certain really specific set of skills
Yep.
and habits.
Yep.
Because you cannot have those skills as long as you got the habits, such as being interested in learning and spending time learning. You can build those skills.
For sure.
Mindset kind of comes into it, but again, I think that mindset actually develops over time for most of us.
No
A lot of
question.
these things, they don't start immediately. Really, it's just certain tasks and habits that lead to having built skills and mindsets that allows you to be entrepreneurial, which therefore means it's not for everyone, but it's for anyone. Does that make
Question.
sense?
Yeah, I think there's a picture that people could see if they're watching the video behind me. It says mindset is everything, and it's a goldfish wearing a shark fin, and it's perception, it's mentality, it's the idea that you can grow into whatever it is that you want to. And for him, he wants to be a shark one day, and he's a goldfish. So it's like if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, but you start off beginning like a goldfish, and if the shark is success in your mind, and whatever success means to you, you can build it as you go. And I think that impacting people and learning, I mean, that's life 101, like relationships, experiences, knowledge, being successful. And again, whatever that means to you, that's just part of the journey. So if you can tie that to your business and your entrepreneurial journey, and you can help people along the way, that's a life well lived.
100%. I could not agree more. It's like, you know, if life is short, how do you make the most of it?
Yep.
And this, for me, is, I think, the perfect balance. So
You
there
got
you
it,
go,
brother.
man.
You know the answer. We'll end on that, man. You're amazing. You're mighty. I can't wait to have you on again, brother. And I look forward to seeing where our journey leads, man.
Thank you so much, man. I've loved it.
You got it, brother.